everybody. Welcome back to A Cult of Misfits. I am the ineffable Matt Owens. Good to see you again. Just so you know, I'm recording these on Twitter or X. I'm having a real hard time calling it X, so we're just going to call it Twitter for now. Loving the new platform. So I'm recording these live on Twitter. If you ever want to join me and catch me, good luck catching me live, guys. I'm like lightning in a bottle. Um, if your chakras are aligned and our frequencies are in tune and Venus is in the right position, you just might catch me live on Twitter. So good luck with that. You can follow me on Twitter, follow me over on Instagram. Although I have to be honest, I'm taking a little hiatus from Instagram, but I'm still over there. You can check out some of my videos and content on Instagram or YouTube, Spotify. Guys, I'm everywhere. A Cult of Misfits. Ask your Alexa about it today. She'll be more than happy to play my soothing voice for you. Um, Today I want to talk about several things. I'm going to switch gears, but the meat and potatoes, we're going to be talking about ancient civilizations. We're going to talk about the pyramids. We're going to talk about Lemuria. Might even dabble with Atlantis. We're going to talk about our history, our creation, where we came from. Yes, there's going to be talk of interdimensional beings. That's just sort of standard around here, guys. But I just want to say that I've been digging into our history, and I want to start talking about it. This morning, I was sort of reminiscing about the holidays. Is where we're going to start this whole thing, and just how much I've changed over the last couple of years. Anytime I went to a social function, it usually caused me great anxiety. And anytime, whether it was people I knew or didn't know, was irrelevant. There was just a lot of anxiety, a lot of internal stuff I was dealing with. I always felt the need to put on these masks in order to just pretend to be happy or pretend to, you know, enjoy small talk, right? Just sort of going with the motions, just grinding my teeth, hating every moment of it. That is until I discovered this magical thing called my true authentic self, which apparently I didn't know too well. But over the last couple of years, I've been really getting to know that old boy, and he's really blossoming, and I'm really proud of him. I'm really learning to be my true authentic self. And I was reminiscing about this last round of holidays because I was around a lot of family and how it used to cause me great anxiety, and I didn't feel anxiety at all. And that brought me great joy because I've been working very hard at it about slowly changing my reaction to things, right? Because this anxiety, all of these stories, etc., they're all just in my head. Um, and so I always felt that I needed to go to these functions out of obligation or out of guilt, or that I just had to show up because that's just what you do. But learning to embrace my true authentic self and just be who I truly am, I started learning I can say no to these things and not feel guilty about it. I didn't know that that was an option all of these years. I just felt like I had to do it because I didn't want to deal with the guilt, and you just do what you do. So um, I've really been pursuing freedom in my life, and a major component of this freedom is the ability to just be who I am. It doesn't matter if I'm around grandma or the Pope or my friends. I'm going to act the same way around all three of those people. Um, and to me, that's freedom. That's the ability to just be who I am, to let go of other people judging me, not caring what other people think about me. It was a whole process, right? So it didn't happen overnight, but when I started getting into these, more spiritual things, um, I was always very cautious going into social functions because I didn't want to weird people out. You can't start talking about the Anunnaki right out of the gate. That's gonna that's gonna panic a lot of people. And so I would always sort of feel like I couldn't really be my true self ever. And it's not that everybody has to enjoy talking about things of a spiritual nature, but I just felt like I could never, I always had to just sort of pretend to fit in. And part of being a misfit and embracing my misfit hood is just letting her rip and letting my weirdness flag fly. I tell my kids we're on team weird. There's nothing to be ashamed about there. And so I often found that I was putting a damper on myself when I was going to these social functions. I didn't want to talk about aliens, or I didn't want to talk about interdimensional beings or the afterlife, because a lot of these topics make a lot of people jumpy, like real antsy. They don't, and it becomes real obvious when I put my feelers out. Maybe we'll start the conversation about psychedelics or mushrooms or something. It becomes very evident if they are on board with this conversation or not, or the afterlife, or the meaning of reality or God or any of these things. You can tell when people get real antsy. And so, um, in embracing myself, who I truly am, I just, people know that I'm the guy that talks about that sort of shit. And if you don't like it, then don't sit by me. Because I love who I am, I'm not embarrassed about it like I once was. Where now I embrace who I truly am, and for me, that's bringing more joy and satisfaction in my life because I'm not holding back. I'm not hiding who I am. I'm not feeling awkward because I have to participate in a conversation I don't want to, perhaps. So, um, just thought I'd mention that because it was on my mind this morning. But like I said, I've been diving into these ancient civilizations and gone down many rabbit holes, which I love. But it reminded me that I need to continue to question everything. As I had my what I call my awakening in 2020, I just started seeing things differently. I had the ability to start asking questions and questioning everything in my reality, questioning the government, questioning the afterlife, questioning Christianity, questioning my reaction to things, right? Um, and I sort of found that once I started diving into these things of more spiritual nature, that I didn't question them as much as I used to, and I had to remind myself, like, hold on, why aren't I questioning that there's an afterlife? Why aren't I questioning aliens? Because a part of me, I want to believe in these things, and so I don't really dig too deep. But I've been digging into some spiritual things lately. For example, the idea of Nibiru. There's this planet Nibiru that's allegedly out there. This mystery planet X that comes around every 30,000 years or whatever, and perhaps it's the Anunnaki's home planet or whatever. Who knows, right? But people speak about it like it's truth. And I started digging into the whole Nibiru thing, like, well, where did this first come about, right? Rather than just accepting it, because I'm on board, right? I'm open minded, and I'm like, yeah, sure, of course, there's a mystery planet floating around out there somewhere that nobody's discovered. Like, why not? I'm open to anything, but I'm also looking at it with a critical eye, and not just blindly accepting whatever information I'm given. So, apparently, there's this guy named Zechariah Sitchin. Perhaps you've heard of him. And he did his own interpretation. He studied all of the ancient Sumerian, which is the original clay tablets. It's the oldest form of written communication that we have. It's where mainstream scholars believe that civilization first began was around 6,000 years ago. Um, and so there's these tablets that have been described, and they talk about these celestial divine beings that came down and basically started mankind, and they were called the Anunnaki. And there's this idea that the Anunnaki came here in search of gold, and they were creating the humans as slaves in order to mine this gold, and this whole backstory. And I was like, yeah, that sounds amazing. And I'm totally on board with all of it, right? Big fan of sci fi. So all of this aligns with everything that I wish were true. But I started analyzing it this week and realizing that all of these ideas, Nibiru and the whole gold thing and the Anunnaki, it being creating us as slaves, etc. This is all because of Zechariah Sitchin's interpretations of the tablets. It's just based on one man's interpretations of these ancient tablets, right? And of course, it's all open to interpretation. That's what's so interesting slash frustrating about it is you just kind of have to trust your gut that it says what it says, right? Because I don't speak ancient Sumerian. So this one guy, Zechariah Sitchin, started translating these tablets in a way that mains mainstream science, mainstream scholars in the subject were saying, no, 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 no. It doesn't say anything about Nibiru. It doesn't say anything in there about gold. These are all just his interpretations of it. And frankly, we can't see where he got that from. So I feel like this whole rabbit hole has been created. This whole narrative has been created based on one man's interpretation of these tablets. And so at the end of the day, who knows, right? We just have to kind of trust that this is kind of sort of what it's talking about. Um, I started questioning Lemuria as well. Like we talk about these ancient civilizations that we're going to dive into deeply here in a minute. These ancient civilizations that perhaps existed before the Great Flood, allegedly around 12,000 years ago. Um, that there was a land called Lemuria, and I just sort of was like, yeah, of course there's a land called Lemuria. Like that makes sense that there were civilizations around perhaps beforehand, and like I was totally on board with that. But I started diving into it and realizing that the history of Lemuria is there were these scientists in the 1800s that were, um, they were studying lemurs in Madagascar, and they're trying to figure out why the lemurs over here were different than the ones over there, and perhaps there was a land bridge or something that linked them together thousands of years. They were just like hypothesizing, just a couple of scientist bros talking about lemurs. And they called it Lemuria, right? This maybe this land bridge existed called Lemuria, and that's that. And then Madame Blavatsky, who was a renowned occultist and spiritualist from the 1800s, right? You can look into her if you want. Um, she really latched onto this whole concept of Lemuria that these two science bros invented, and started making up these stories saying that well, she said that they were channeled. It was channeled messages, of course, and I think that these there are channel messages, so I don't want to knock it right out of the gate. But she latched onto this whole Lemuria thing and started talking about different types of beings that lived in Lemuria. There were like seven different types, all this stuff. This whole story starts emerging from this idea of like, hey, where'd those lemurs come from? So I just questioned everything, right? I was recently watching The Crown. So good, so good. Final season. Um, and they were talking about Princess Diana's death and all of that, and how there was this conspiracy. There's always this conspiracy theory that the royal family had Diana killed and she was assassinated because she was not one of them or whatever. Um, and for the longest time, I believed that because I'm like, once you start diving down some of these rabbit holes, you start realizing that the government is capable of things that are pretty unbelievable that they've done. And so you start to believe that, like, yeah, well, sure, anything's possible, I suppose. And so you start thinking that the government is capable of anything. And then, like, the royal family, especially if you start um, looking into and believing that they're, perhaps reptilian shapeshifters or whatever you want to call them. Um, and so you start to view them as, these evil beings. Maybe they're even Nephilim or, these wild things that they could be. And so then you start to believe, like, yes, of course they assassinated Diana because they're lizard people and that's just what they do. And I started to take a step back. Like, I took a deep breath and I was like, hold on a minute. Like, let's just think about this. And then as I was watching The Crown, I realized that this whole idea, this whole concept, this storyline that she was assassinated because, she went against the royal family, it was basically just invented by Dodi Al Fayed's father. He had a vendetta against the royal family in the UK, and he just started spewing and spouting off all of these things after his son died and Diana died, and blaming it on the royal family. And so I just like to question everything, right? Like, I would like to believe that they're evil people, and this family is ruling us for thousands of years, and they've taken over the world, but maybe not, right? Maybe not. I have to analyze everything critically. So just little things like, was Diana assassinated by the lizard people? Like, no, I don't think so. Maybe, sure, but I don't think so. Is Nibiru really out there? Maybe. I don't think it is, but maybe. And at the end of the day, all of these things are just hypothetical because at the base foundation of everything, how I view everything, I genuinely think there's a very good chance we're in a simulation. So at the end of the day, really, none of this matters in a very real way. But it's still fun to talk about. So we'll continue. um, let's talk about creation because I've really been questioning creation. Of course, I'm very familiar with the Christian idea of creation, but I've been diving into Gnostic ideas of creation and the concept that perhaps these reptilians, the iconography of the snake or the dragon, meaning wisdom or knowledge, and is not necessarily a bad or evil thing. um, so I'm really into looking at all of these ancient civilizations and just sort of cross-referencing them as best I can with the use of AI. Shout out to ChatGPT for helping me out in my scholarly my scholarly knowledge. But I just find that there's so many patterns across the world, across all of these ancient, most, I should say, not all, many of these ancient civilizations. There's just so many similarities, and I love to see the patterns, and I love to talk about them. So, in the story of creation, and I'm generalizing all of this because there's variance in all, worldwide, and the creation stories, of course, but all in all, I've kind of boiled them down to the basics. And the basics is that there were these primordial beings that are, in my opinion, beyond our comprehension. They are perhaps the very nature of our reality. They are consciousness. These are just human words to explain things that I think we really can't comprehend. So there is the everything. And in many, many, many of these stories, they talk about how the everything is dualistic, how it represents both order and chaos, the black and the white, the yin and the yang, the male and the female, the Christos and the Sophia, the male and the female. And so from everything comes from this everything, right? These primordial, ineffable beings that we can't really wrap our minds around, right? And then according to most of these creation tales, um, from the primordial everything, this soup of energy that we found ourselves in, um, was birthed these gods, these younger gods. Perhaps they're not physical beings, right? Is what I think. These extremely powerful gods, and um, in the ancient Mesopotamian tablets, they talk about the Anunnaki. This is who I think we're talking about: is the Anunnaki, the Titans in Greek mythologies. The Egyptians have very similar gods. The Vanir in Norse mythology. The Aztecs have similar gods that are a step below this primordial level. Okay, and there's many of them. Um, Almost all of these tales talk about gods plural, right? That there's this pantheon of gods, that as above so below, that every god above is made in the creation of those, in the image of, you get what I'm saying. Made in the image of your creator, the next level up, whatever that means, right? So there's these godlike beings, and they're called the Watchers, and I believe that they could be the Watchers in Jewish tradition. That there are these beings that are here to watch us and guide our evolution in a positive way. I believe. Um, and if you didn't listen to my last episode, I talk about how these Watchers may still be here on the planet watching us all of this time, in a light spectrum that we can't perceive them in. Right? That I think that we don't have the technology, and our little human eyeballs can't see them, but I think that they're here. They were called the Watchers in the ancient books, and I think that they still might be here. And I think that the big reveal, the big revelation, might be that we can see them, and they've been here the whole time. So I talked about that more in the last episode if you're interested. But so there's this idea that these very powerful gods then created lesser gods, demigods or half gods or demons, depending on who you're talking to and which perspective you're getting it from. But there's these lesser gods that are now on the earth as well. The Mesopotamians call them the Ajiji. Um, and they're powerful, but not as powerful as the big dogs. So these might be some of the Egyptian gods, and I'm starting to wonder if these ancient gods actually walked amongst us back in the day, which is interesting to think about because so much of all of this ancient stuff, this ancient knowledge, is all very symbolic, right? It's not meant to be taken literal, which is where Christianity was different. Christianity looked at the ancient scriptures and said, nope, we're taking this all literally, guys. And this all actually happened. And all of the other spiritual and religious thoughts at the time didn't understand because everything was meant to be taken symbolically. And so I see these ancient Egyptian paintings depicting, the gods with the crocodile head or the ibis head or whatever, and I'm wondering, like, is that meant to be taken literal? Were they actually walking amongst us? Were they shapeshifters, perhaps? So that's sort of interesting to think about too. Um, And then below these lesser gods, the Igigi or these demigods or whatever, are then the humans that are imbued with a lesser degree of divinity, right? That the breath of God or the blood of a god was put into the clay in order to create man. And so there's divinity all up the chain. And so it's interesting to think about, like, who created us? Was it the Anunnaki, right? Is there not just one God? Perhaps we were created by a species of what we perceive to be gods because they have technologies that we can't comprehend. And so to us, it appears that they have these godlike powers, right? And we start talking about, like, the pyramids and these ancient monolithic giant stone structures that exist all over the world, right? Um, it's a real head scratcher, and I've never really dove deep into the pyramids. I've always been interested in it casually interested in aliens, and, like, well, maybe the aliens helped us build it thousands of years ago, like, question mark, who knows? And I never gave it any more thought beyond that. But I've been kind of diving deep into ancient civilizations, perhaps ancient technologies. And just to give you a quick timeline, just for my own brain, I did this because I hear about the Sumerians and the Egyptians and the ancient Indians and the Mayans and all, and it all was a big blur to me, and I didn't understand, like, the timeline and where we are on that and who was around first. And so I'm just going to give you a real brief rundown. According to mainstream science, they believe that civilization started 6,000 years ago, and that started with the ancient Sumerians. They lived in the Fertile Crescent between the Tigris and the Euphrates River in modern day Iraq, is what we're talking about. So, this is where civilization started, according to mainstream archaeology and science, because we have these tablets from 6,000 years ago, and there's nothing found before that indicates a civilization, according to mainstream science. Okay. So that was 6,000 years ago. And then about 400 years go by, and we get the Egyptians. Okay, their civilization is starting to get going. And then another 500 years beyond that, then India starts kicking into gear, and their civilization starts up. Then about another 500 or 600 years after that, you start getting the Jewish people, Persians, Chinese, and the Mayans. They're all kind of lumped into that. That was about 4,000 years ago. Then, as you're getting closer to us, you get the Greeks, ancient Greeks. And then about 800 years after that, you get the ancient Romans, about 2,000 years ago. Okay. So, what's interesting about all of this is that nobody really knows how old the pyramids are because you can't carbon date stone. So, what scientists have to do is they have to look at the artifacts that are around the pyramids and date the oldest artifacts that they can find around the pyramids. And those were around, you know, 3,000 years ago or whatever. No, that's not true. 6,000 years ago or something like that. But what I'm starting to question and starting to believe is that these pyramids, these ancient monolithic structures, go way, 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 way back. There's a lot of evidence pointing to an actual real great flood that happened about 12,000 years ago. You can look up the Younger Dryas theory if you're interested in such things. I won't go into it here in detail, but there was a giant cataclysm that happened that quite possibly raised sea levels by 500 feet and flooded most of the earth, right? And changed the geography of it forever. The ancient Mesopotamian tablets also talk about a cataclysm before the Great Flood. They talked about an evil wind that swept through the earth and destroyed everything in essence. So that's interesting, right? And there's just been many cataclysms, whether it's volcanic cataclysm that puts ash and cloud around the planet for a couple of years and throws us into an ice age. Like, this sort of stuff happens regularly, geologically speaking, right? And so it's very interesting because archaeologists just discovered fairly recently um, something called Göbekli Tepe. It's a site in Turkey that they believe is around 10,000 years old that shows evidence of civilization. which goes against everything that mainstream science believes, because they say it happened 6,000 years ago, and this is saying that there was a civilization around that was 10,000 years ago, and nobody understands how that is possible. Right? There's all of these ancient structures that have been built over time and then buried mysteriously. Nobody knows why it was buried, whether it was intentionally buried or it was a part of the great cataclysm that covered everything in Earth. But there's these ancient structures that are 10,000 years old at Göbekli Tepe that are pointing to very specific stars, pointing to the Sirius star, and they're aligned with the solstices and various constellations. And it's very obvious that that they had a knowledge of astrology, right? And architecture and engineering and how to move these giant stone blocks, right? That seem impossible. And they seem impossible because, according to mainstream science and mainstream scholars, they believe that civilization just suddenly, boop, came about 6,000 years ago. That suddenly humans had the ability to do complex mathematics, to build things, architecture and engineering. Suddenly they knew how to do agriculture and animal husbandry and just all of these advanced things that before that they had no knowledge of, because these were just hunter gatherers. And I started thinking, like, what does a hunter gatherer mean? Is that like a caveman? No, a hunter gatherer are usually just these nomadic peoples, like think the Native Americans, or think the natives in the jungles of Brazil, right, where they literally hunt with a spear or bow and arrow for their food. They hunt animals. They make their own clothes out of hide or whatever is in the area. These are hunter gatherers, and so according to mainstream science, it would be as if these tribesmen in the woods of in the jungles of Brazil were to suddenly start building these advanced pyramids uh, with such precision that it blows the mind, right? With like 99.98% accuracy in terms of pointing to the correct stars, or perfectly built to the exact height, and the mathematics of it all. It's so over my head, right? You take the circumference of this and the diameter of that, and it equals the circumference of the Earth. And if you check all of the temples, they all align to the Temple of Giza, and they're all aligned to these stars, and it's all quite overwhelming for people who are hunter gatherers, right? To suddenly have gained this knowledge to build these incredible feats of engineering that are by many almost impossible, even by modern day standards, right? That even with modern technology, it would be extremely difficult and challenging to replicate what we're looking at globally in terms of these pyramids and these monolithic structures. It makes no sense. Once you start looking into it, it makes absolutely no sense. And you start looking and digging deeper and deeper and deeper, and you see that oftentimes on these sacred sites, um, there are these beautiful monolithic structures, often pyramids, right? And then they're buried, and then on top of that is built another version that's a crappier version of the one below it, right? As if the original builders are no longer around and somebody is trying to copy what they had seen, right? And then on top of that, they're built a lesser version, and this is all over the world, where these ancient sites have these. The architecture just gets worse and worse and worse as time goes on, indicating that the original creators of these are no longer here, or if they're here, they're not making any structures lately. And so nobody on Earth knows how old the pyramids are. Everybody is just guessing. Mainstream science and scholarship is just taking organic material that they found around the sites and just dating the oldest organic material they can find. That's why they say that the pyramids are only 4,000, 5,000 years old or whatever, because the oldest found organic material was there, and they're like, well, that's probably just when they built it. But they have no idea. They have no idea whether or not the Egyptians built those, or if they discovered the pyramids that had already been there for thousands of years, because there's so many interesting things about it when you start diving into it. The Egyptians are well known for painting and putting writing and their art on everything. They did art on everything. But when you go into these pyramids of Giza, there's no art. There's no hieroglyphs. There's no um, paintings or markings. It's completely blank. Isn't that weird for a civilization that really likes to paint things up and write on things? So just a lot of weird stuff. A lot of weird stuff. Just the fact that there's over 2 million stones in the giant pyramid, and most of them weigh anywhere from 2 tons to 80 tons. And worldwide, there are ones that go up to 1,000 tons, guys. That's something that my mind can hardly wrap around, is 1,000 tons. How are they moving this shit? It would be extremely difficult with modern technology, the biggest equipment that we have to recreate these things, right? And they're precision cut, as if with a laser, as if with a diamond saw, right? We can only get those kind of cuts today with a diamond saw. And to the best of our knowledge, they did not have that technology available. So then the question is, the skeptics would say, modern mainstream scholars would say, like, where's the evidence of this technology? That's fine. If there was another civilization around there that had advanced technology, where's that technology? And of course, it doesn't exist or hasn't been found yet. And I'm wondering if perhaps the the creators of the pyramids were the technology themselves, that it was a biological slash spiritual technology that we have perhaps lost over time or forgotten about over time. And there's these ancient mysteries and secrets of the universe that I believe our ancestors tried to pass along to us on these stone tablets or on these monolithic structures, for example. And they were trying to pass along knowledge of our history, knowledge of creation and perhaps prehistory, right? Because all of the ancient civilizations talk about these beings coming down from the heavens, right? And living on Earth. And part of me, I want to believe that they were aliens or gods, or let's just call them beings that were here on the planet, and they were building these structures with a technology that we don't understand, and don't currently have access to. Whether it's levitation techniques or using sound waves, but maybe it's something that we can't even comprehend. That's something that is so far outside of the way the human mind operates that we can't even comprehend it, right? But then on the flip side of that, perhaps we have that same ability within ourselves, that divine DNA, right? Whether it's God, Yahweh, or the Anunnaki, or whatever you want to label it as, our creator. Um, I think that a breath of the divine is within us, and perhaps I always talk about the 99% of our DNA that scientists don't understand. They call junk DNA. Perhaps that is the divine DNA within us that is just begging to be activated, right? Perhaps we have levitation powers within us. Perhaps we have the ability to manipulate and create these things in our reality, and we just have forgotten how. We've perhaps lost the magic, because so much of our reality is based on the mind and belief systems, right? If we believe a certain paradigm, then that will be the certain paradigm. But as that shifts and changes, I've seen this in my own life personally, but also on a grander scale globally. That as these thoughts shift and change, then our reality shifts and changes. And so I wonder if we just have yet to tap into that immense power that we perhaps don't even know about, right? That we don't believe that it's there, and over time we relegate all of this and call it a myth, or just call it magic or superstitious, or any of those things, and don't take it literally and authentically. And so perhaps it does dissolve, right? Perhaps there was a time when dragons and elves and mermaids existed, but over time people stopped believing in them, and they just sort of started dissolving away from the reality, our reality, right? And shifting into another reality, perhaps. These are the things I talk about. These are the things I think about all the time. What if this? What if that? Um, but it's just super interesting. I do think whether or not it was human or extraterrestrial or interdimensional or something that we can't even comprehend, something built those pyramids with a technology that we don't currently have. And I wonder if that's going to shift, and if AI is perhaps going to assist us in um, figuring this whole thing out, right? Or at least helping us to fill in some of the pieces. I was listening to a podcast with somebody talking about how, depending on your perspective, we've always had a different God, whether it's a pantheon of gods, or Yahweh, the one true God, or Allah, or for many people, technology is God. Um, and so their hypothesis was that perhaps this AI that is coming to creation is where we are watching the birth of a new God that we have created, right? As above, so below, made in our image, that thinks like us and acts like us, in the same way that we think and act like our creator, theoretically, according to the ancient scriptures. So it's just interesting to think about. We're just in a really, really interesting time. And I just feel like we're on the precipice of something huge, a huge paradigm shift, whether that's alien disclosure, or um, getting to peek behind the curtain a little bit more, in terms of the nature of this reality and our existence, and whether the pyramids were constructed for spiritual purposes, or energetic purposes. There's definitely talk about how they could have been these energy structures. There's water beneath the bedrock that could be used as a conductor, and the pyramid had a gold tip, and this white beautiful stone on the outside that had conductive properties, and perhaps they were just giant towers to conduct electricity of some sort. So just all these theories that are fascinating, and I'm open to all of them. Um, but at the end of the day, it makes my brain hurt. The smoke starts coming out of my ears, because it just makes no sense. There's so much of it that just doesn't add up, and there's so many missing pieces, and I'm starting to question whether the government actually knows. Maybe they've dug into it and they're just like, well, we don't know. There's a lot we don't know, and maybe that's the great mystery, is we're meant to just sort of be playing this game to um, get to the bottom of things, right? Like, it's a giant puzzle. I view it as a game. I try not to take life too seriously anymore these days, because, like I said, I genuinely do think that this is all just a simulation, but it doesn't make it any less exciting, right? I'm just sort of along for the ride and enjoying the adventure of it all, the ups and the downs, right? The days of bliss and joy, and the days of misery and sadness, just about embracing all of them, and just thanking the universe for this wild experience. It's fucking wacky. This place is fucking insane. And the deeper you dive down some of these rabbit holes, you just start shaking your head, going, none of this makes any sense. And just when it starts to make sense to me, then something else gets thrown in the mix and everything unravels again. I'm like, nope, that actually makes me question it all again. Now I'm re-questioning things that I thought were truth. So I've learned to let go of the idea of truth, and um, I love the puzzle. I love the game. Um, It's so insane. I was listening to another podcast where they were asking somebody, "What do you know for real? What do you know for sure?" And it's such a good question. So I thought about it for myself, and the things that I know for sure are that I'm here. I don't know about you. You may be a fragment of the fractal within my mind. Um, So I know for sure that I'm here, whatever that is, whether I am divinity, or I am the Matt Owens avatar, or whatever that is. But hi, I'm here. And I know for sure that everything always works out. That one is a foundation for me, because oftentimes when I go through life and I experience bumps in the road, it's very useful to remind myself that everything works out. And I had to test this rigorously in my own life. I really put the universe to the test. And I got my notepad out, metaphorically, and I took notes anytime something happened in my life. Anytime there was an event, or I didn't know how I was going to pay for that, or how this was going to work itself out, or any of those things, uh, I realized that it always worked out. Now, the caveat to that, of course, was I didn't know when or how it was going to work out. Right, the human in me, my mind, my ego, really, really would love to know the answers to those things. But the way that the universe works, according to my observations in my own life and the lives of others, I'm watching you. I'm watching you. Is that everything always works out. And again, that's belief. If you believe that everything will always work out, it will work out. And that's not to say that you're not going to experience trials or tribulations in your life, because I certainly have and will continue to until the day that my body dies. Um, but I just believe that that's all part of the experience. It's meant to raise us up, to make us stronger, to make us more resilient, to give us more opportunities to have faith and trust in the unknown, to have faith and trust in the divine, whether that's Yahweh or the Anunnaki or whatever, right? Um, and so the more that I've learned to just lean into that faith and trust, lean into that system, that foundation for me, that everything will always work out, even though I can't figure out when or how. Um, I always like to report back to you, and at first I report back to myself and say, like, see, I told you. It always works out, because there's always that voice in my head that's trying to convince me otherwise. And I've gotten real good at muting that voice, because that voice is fear and it doesn't serve me by continuing to tell me that things are not going to work out this time. This is the time that it's all going to go to hell. This is the time that you're going to die, whatever the fear is. And so I've been practicing muting that voice, learning to ignore it and rewrite the script and say, "Ah, da, 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 da. Everything always works out." So maybe you needed to hear that in your life today. Who knows? But that's what I got going on in my life. Thinking a lot about Mesopotamia, nature of reality. Oh, before we go, since we're talking about all of this, what about those aliens in Miami? Can we just talk about that for a second? I don't think that it was real. I don't think it was a thing. I think there's just a lot of false stories out there that are just meant to confuse us. And um, I'm just learning to be more discerning and let my intuition, let my gut tell me which direction to lean. So whether or not the Nephilim were in Florida yesterday, I guess time will tell. But with that, I will end it. End transmission.